Hey guys, welcome back to the Crosshairs Couch. Today I'm joined by Martin Edmondson. We're talking about Driver San Francisco. Martin, thank you very much for joining us.
Welcome.
Now, give us a bit of an overview of San Francisco and where this sits in the Driver timeline.
Well, in the timeline, it actually takes place, or the story kicks off some 6 months or so after the end of Driver 3, in which Tanner and Jericho, Tanner is the undercover cop who we actually met in the first Driver and was carried on through Driver 1, 2 and 3. So the story takes place 6 months or so after the shootout at the end of Driver 3 in Istanbul. And actually what's happening at the beginning of San Francisco is that Jericho is being sentenced for that crime, and that's where we pick it up.
Now, this is your baby. You've been attached to the Driver series for a long time now. How have you seen the series evolve over the last, say, decade?
Well, the theme is still the same. I mean, Driver has always been, the very first game certainly was heavily inspired by the classic 70s, not just 70s to be honest, but predominantly 70s Hollywood car chases. And that's something that we maintained for a while. It kind of went away from that a little bit the last two, but we've very much got back to that with Driver San Francisco. So fans of the original Driver, and that, especially the muscle car handling, the big tail-out slides and burnouts and so on, will feel very much at home with this one. And features have come and gone. The getting out of the car, Driver 2 was the first game to feature action out of the car, but we don't have that in San Francisco. We have, of course, a new shift feature, which is a brand new and unique feature, but the essence of the driving is very much back to the roots of the first game.
Well, you mentioned shift, and that is one of the big tentpole features for Driver San Francisco. Give us a bit of an overview of what it is, why you've implemented it, and the things that players will be able to do with this, as opposed to getting out and just picking up another vehicle.
Well, yes, shift is it's brand new, totally unique in the driving genre, and from a functional point of view, it allows you to just instantly acquire another car, and by instantly I mean literally click, click. It also allows you to shift from one side of the city to the other side of the city instantaneously. Obviously these things upgrade. You can't do one side of the city to the other side immediately. It upgrades, but it gives a real a very fast, almost reactive gameplay in certain modes, especially multiplayer. It's a real it really transforms what your expectations of a driving game are. And in the single-player game, it's used as a tool. It's not used in all missions, and it's also deeply intertwined in the story as well. And
it's not an unlimited ability. There is a cap on the number of shifts people will be able to do by performing moves with the car itself. No, it is unlimited, and that sounds surprising. I realise that, but we've had a long time in in developing this game and testing it, focus group testing it. We've been testing twice a week now for almost 2 years, and the things that we've learned from that are that it actually isn't necessary to limit it. It's something that limits itself by virtue of the fact that if you are in shift, then you're not driving the car. So in things like multiplayer, for example, you're not scoring. So there are disadvantages to being in shift, but we found that players just find their own level. Some like to shift a lot, and some like to shift very little, and you just find your own level, and that's why we've limited it, or that's why we control it in the way that we do. How will that work in the single-player campaign? I imagine if you're in a car chase, for example, and someone gets a little bit ahead, it must be advantageous to jump to the car that's closest to your target. How do you then make chases that really matter, rather than somebody just kind of inching their way towards the target vehicle?
Well, that depends on the nature of the mission. If the mission is to achieve something with the car that you're in, then you can do anything you want with the other cars, but ultimately you have to achieve it with that car. If it's a free-form mission, then you can do things like that, but that's a lot easier said than done. So if you're in a chase and you're trying to take down the getaway, it sounds very easy to say, well, just hop into a car further up the street and try and head on the guy that you're chasing, and you can do that. There's no limit, nothing preventing you from doing it, but it is actually quite tricky, and it becomes a personal choice whether you enjoy being in the heat of the action, down the street level in the chase, or whether you want to try and be more tactical about it. And the feature was designed from the ground up 5 years ago. It was the starting point of the design of the game, so the missions are designed with this in mind and tuned to take advantage of it and not not end up with a feature that's essentially a cheat.
Now, from what I've seen, from what we've seen with the game so far, it looks like you'll also get a little bit of the personality of each of the cars and the drivers that you
then take hold of. Missions in progress, stealing a police car, for example. Tell us a little bit about those.
Yeah, we have a system that we call it Life in a Bubble, and what it is that there are hundreds of people, characters in this city, and when you shift from one car to another, if there's a passenger in that car, then it's almost like you're suddenly the driver, and you get into the middle of the conversation. So whatever was happening, whatever they were talking about, Tanner is suddenly thrust into this situation, and it can be quite amusing. Him having to deal with he doesn't know the person beforehand, and he's got it could be anybody, just somebody shouting at him. So there's all sorts of scenarios, and some of them are quite amusing. And Tanner has to very quickly get his head around what's going on, and it's only when there's a passenger, and so it's not every single car that you shift into, but there are hundreds of these people driving around the city.
Now tell us a little bit about San Francisco, why you've set the game in this location, and what you can do with this huge palette that you've created.
Well, San Francisco actually was a fairly obvious choice for the game, and it was made very quickly at the beginning. The reason for it was, there were three reasons. First of all, it was in the first driver, and the reason it was in the first driver was the inspiration of the game being 70s Hollywood car chases, most famous one of all time being Bullitt, of course, which was in San Francisco. So there's that sort of iconic nature of the city, the most famous car chase city of all time, probably. And the other thing is that as far as American cities go, it is probably the most diverse in terms of driving environment. A lot of US cities tend to be quite regimented block
modular,
and street.
Flat.
And San Francisco, it has that in the downtown area, of course, but it's also vastly more interesting than that. It has, fast-flowing freeways and the iconic bridges, but obviously the hills that everyone knows. But other areas that people that don't, are not familiar with San Francisco are maybe not aware of, like down in the south, a lot of dirt roads and farming areas. So really quite diverse within a fairly small area.
We've had a brief taste of multiplayer so far. Can you tell us anything more about the modes that players will see when the game ships?
We have a lot of modes, actually. We spent the last year adding quite a bit more to the multiplayer side of things. We've got a split-screen two-player, which has a range of competitive and also cooperative games. Then the online, which is a major part of Driver, and this is where Shift really transforms the experience. And it allows us to do things that are more interesting than most normal driving games would be online. So we have capture the flag type of games. We have base defense type of games, obviously races and chases, but it really helps with the problem of some racing games, for example. First bend, crash, that's the end of your experience a lot of the time. But with Shift, you've got people constantly grabbing cars, and it depends on the rule of the particular race. There are races where Shift is completely banned, and this is just because we want a particularly one type of experience. But certainly in the flag capture the flag type games, with the two teams of four, and you ram him, you get the flag, and your teammates are trying to slam cars into him to get it back. Whilst others are, it's quite a frantic experience.
Now, licensed cars are making their first appearance in San Francisco. That's a huge change for a series that's been running as long as Driver has. Why is now the right time to include licensed vehicles, and which manufacturers will we see?
Well, the reason why we chose now to include real cars is not because this was the first time that we wanted to do it. It's just that it's the first time that we've had the resource to be able to really follow it up. I mean, we've had a team on this issue for almost the full length of the project, and their full-time job has been nothing but dealing with the manufacturers, sending them the assets, making sure everyone's comfortable, making sure we have a level playing field as well of what we can and can't do with the cars. It's no good having, you can do this to one car and you can't do that to another car. We have had to negotiate everything so it's the same. And this has been a huge undertaking. And yeah, we have between 130 and 140 real licensed cars from pretty much any. The way how we've chosen the cars is to approach it from the point of view of how iconic the car is. And that doesn't mean that the game is just full of Lamborghinis and things like that, although it does have those. It's more about how iconic is the car. So if you think of any TV movie car chase, practically anyone that you can think of, then the chances are that the car that was in that chase is in the game.
Is there anyone that just didn't want to play ball in terms of being part of the game and offering destructibility of their vehicle?
Yes, there are one or two, but most of them actually. When you play the game, most of the manufacturers are represented there. But there are some. I mean, there are some that are just tied to exclusives, and we know with some other publisher, and there's just nothing you can do about that. If they're not available to even sign, you can't even approach them to get into the discussion.
Now, you also got a Wii version of the game in the works. It's slightly different from a story and a gameplay point of view. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, the Wii version is a different story altogether, although it's the same characters. It actually deals with events far before Driver San Francisco. It's dealing with Solomon Kane, who was the crime boss who Jericho used to work for, actually. And it's a different game. It doesn't feature Shift. It's the thing about Shift is that it absolutely demands and requires the hardware tech in current generation Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. It's been one of the nice things to work on a game like this. It's not just a case of making nicer graphics and better this and better effects and so on. This is a system that actually absolutely requires these systems. Couldn't have been done on the previous systems. The Wii obviously doesn't have that same kind of horsepower for doing the same kind of effect, so it's a different story that doesn't involve it. It's and also a different sort of age group as well.
Didn't one just hold off and do a Wii 2 version with the higher spec potentially?
Well, remember that we started this quite some time ago, so that wasn't even there was no opportunities there. But it's a nice game. It's just a very different type of game.
Now, finally, the game has seen a couple of delays. Where are you at in the production cycle now, and what did you do with the additional time that the delays afforded you?
Well, right now we are just a few months from being finished. The game comes out in September, so we have just a few months left on development. It's mainly polish at this stage, finishing a couple of the features, but mainly polish. The delay, which was a considerable delay, it was a year, I think, was the total time that we took extra. And what we did with most of that time was to add extra content. The split screen modes and more multiplayer modes, but a lot more stuff in the city to do. So although you have the running thread of the story and you play the part of Tanner and so on, there are these other activities, over 100 races and challenges, various things, dares that we call them in the city there, that are optional quests, but they pay you in willpower. Willpower is the currency of the game. It allows Tanner to basically get stronger, but also purchase things like garages and cars to store in those garages. So just a lot more content, and obviously more time. It gave us more time to get closer to the target of 50 frames a second, which was another one of the tent poles of the game back in the early design phases.
Martin, thank you very much for chatting with us. Can you give us, everyone watching, an indication of when the game will be out and which platforms?
Yes, the game comes out early September, and it comes out on Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and Wii, PC, and Mac.